Not only are those people who do not know their history doomed to repeat it, but those who often misread it are often doomed to repeat it as well. And those who misread and perhaps fail to read it at all may not have a chance to repeat it at all. And I think we have reached this point where our failure to understand history is going to put us in a position where we won't have a chance to learn it again. The survival of our people is at the crossroads today. And our study of history then should be about more than celebrating our heroes, about more than celebrating the struggles, than just keeping eyes on the prize. And those are valuable things, obviously. But we must look at history in terms of coming to understand our current and our future obligations and what must be accomplished by those things. If we're not careful, we will be beguiled by our study of history. Many of us who have not studied, for instance, Reconstruction history, the history of the United States, particularly of African Americans during the 1860s and 70s, may think that we are entering a new era in American history. We may think that the things that we're witnessing today, the elections of Blacks to political office, and their appointment to various positions, their activities in various corporations, and so forth, is something new in American history. And yet, a study of Reconstruction history will quickly convince us that we are currently undergoing deja vu. Many of us see history as a continuing progress upward and onward. We have bought the American concept of progress, the idea that things must, over time, necessarily get better. There is no law in the universe that tells you that your future survival is assured, that you will continue to exist now and into the future. There have been races and ethnic groups who have been virtually wiped out on this planet. And there's no guarantee that your own group will not be wiped out as well. The idea then that you must necessarily arrive at a point greater than those of your ancestors could possibly be an illusion. The idea that somehow through some great automation, you are going to be in a better condition than your people is an illusion, often history, and recognizing that progress migrations occur in history. History is not a fairy tale where certain things are accomplished and then people live happily ever after. And many of us think then that the accomplishments that we've made up to this point means that we are only going to expand them in the future. I think you had better think about that again. And I'll point out today why we must not.
What is good, my people? We are live back again with another live broadcast on the forecast. Back again. Shouts out to Karma 804 in the building. Appreciate you for coming through. Much love, much love. Hopefully you stay tuned and listen to the one tonight. Shouts out to Raw in the building. I appreciate you coming through like Raw for like you always do, Raw. And I appreciate all the support. Um Now today I'm gonna do something a little different. I guess I was gonna do it before, but we just been going through the history thing a different way. But I was thinking about doing this. Now I don't know how good it's gonna go turn out or whatever, because I just was like tried to hurry up and do it. But some in my spirit was like, yeah, like let me just go on here and just like, you know, at least do the voice. I'm not gonna read it. I'm gonna let a voice to text to voice thing read it. But let's just go through like the first couple chapters in the book that I put out. So, and shouts out to everybody who supported it. You know what I'm saying? And of course we're gonna continue on with the history lessons. But I just follow the spirit when it hits me. I guess. So hopefully everybody can hear me, right? And before we do that, just to give it a second, because I'm probably not gonna go back, and I don't know how long I'm gonna be on here today. So uh, before we do that, I do have to play this. This is my appeal to you, colored
That man
citizens.
thinks that because he holds us in his infernal chains of slavery, that we wish to be white. But he is dreadfully deceived. We wish to be just as our Creator made us, and no avaricious, unmerciful wretch has any business to hold us in slavery or to make slaves of us. However, any man that will not fight under our Lord in the glorious and heavenly cause of freedom ought to be kept along with his children or his family as a slave or in chains, to be butchered by his cruel enemies. Other people of America, have we, in consequence of oppression, nearly given up the spirit of men and adopted that of brutes? And do you answer me no? Well, then I ask you, what set of men can you point to who are so abjectly employed by their oppressors as we are by our natural enemies? And how can these enemies but say that we and our children are not of the human family, but were made by the Creator to be an inheritance to them and theirs? How can the slaveholder but say that he can bribe the best colored person in this country to sell his brethren for a trifling sum of money? How can Mr. Thomas Jefferson but write, I have advanced it as a suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to whites in areas of both mentality and physically. It is this difference that makes it so hard to emancipate these people. Well, I'm happy that Mr. Jefferson advanced his theories for your sake. Well, you will either have to contradict or confirm him by your own actions, not by what our white friends have said and done for us. This country is more ours than it is the whites. We have enriched it with our blood and our tears. I ask your attention to these words found in our own Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. So good luck with that. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, right? This brother was trying to make an appeal to the black people around the world even back then, right? And I don't think they heard him. How do I know? Because we still in the situation that we in, you know. So shouts out to David Walker and David Walker's appeal and stuff, you know. But anyway, man, so and I do gotta shouts out to everybody who supported, you know, what we doing with the book, you know. Let me see. Because I wanted to show you right here, you know, so far, like since February, well, this is February 13th, but it probably was like February 16th or 17th or something. So since then, it's been 87 on here, and you know, on this site is another 12. So that's 99 of them, you know. So man, I definitely appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? But the truth is, like, I wrote it for, like, I don't have any kids, but I specifically did it for, like, you know, the if I was to have a child, like, all of our information should be in one space, you know. And I tried to put it as one, but it's just too big, and definitely nobody is going to want to read that thing that is too big, you know. Just like my lives be too long, you know. I go super deep, you know. And I do have to say this, right? Because like so far, like the people who actually like got it, you know what I'm saying, they're showing love, you know. You can see it on here, right? Like how they got it and stuff, you know. And shouts out to the person that left one the other day, you know. Um and I appreciate it. But the thing is, when I be putting it up, you know, it's so many like of these rednecks or whatever, and Neanderthals, whatever you call them, they just hate everything, and they just some bold faced liars. You know what I'm saying? So they try to lie and do everything, and then you see here like this one dude here, right, talking about, well, first charging 24, and base, and by the way, 24 is my favorite number. So shouts out to that, for what is basically a brochure, 182 pages, which, you know, it is what it is. He says what they, but you can see everybody else has the verified purchase, verified per. This one does not have a verified purchase, though. You know what I'm saying? Um, but it said that historical accuracies in this book are, well, I guess he meant to say inaccuracies. So, but I guess he said the truth, right? That's where he slipped up. The historical accuracies are only exceeded by the grammatical errors, you know, which, like, yeah, I hired a black person or whatever. Um, I hired a black professional editor to do this. You know what I'm saying? But the thing is, like, when I be putting it on there, even though we be on black sites with black history, talking about black stuff, you know, and I bring it up, guess who comes over there, right? And you see, they go out there and try to put the reviews in, and then you know they get other ones to come over here. You know what I'm saying? Um, but that's what they do. They tell lies and misinformation. You know what I'm saying? So shouts out to y'all for supporting it anyway. You know, and it's bigger than me. That's what they don't understand. Like, this is an energy that's beyond me. You know, it's bigger than me. So it is what it is. All right. Um. Now, hopefully, y'all can hear me. I don't know if y'all can hear me, but all right, what I'm gonna do is go through like the first, I guess, two or maybe three, you know, depending on the time or whatever. And depending on the time, and if y'all want to hear more, if anybody come in this joint, then I'll do that, you know. But um, yeah, man, we'll just go through it and you know play it for ourselves, you know. So I appreciate everybody who supported. Much love to all of y'all, you know. All right, so let's see how to do this. All right. So we're gonna just go over this, and if anybody want to come on here, or you disagree with anything, or it's something I left out, or it's something you want to point out, or it's something you want to talk about, you are definitely welcome to come on here. You know what I'm saying? And it is what it is. So, yeah. All right, here we go.
Chapter 1, 1492. The doctrine of discovery. As Christopher Columbus laid eyes on the New World for the first time, little did he know he'd get credit in his own holiday for ushering in a new era of colonialism.
Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. I started again, right? But listen, this is just the AI reading it, so it sounds like whatever. It is what it is. I'm not about to sit here and just sit there and read it or whatever. So we're gonna play it so we can listen to it together. You know what I'm saying? So if they don't read it as a person would read it, then it is what it is. But I guess it's about the information, and maybe I should or I shouldn't be doing this. But hey, someone told me to do it, so I'm gonna do it. But all right, here we go.
The concept of racism itself.
Oh damn! Now it starts.
The concept.
Dang.
Chapter 1, 1492. The doctrine of discovery. As Christopher Columbus laid eyes on the New World for the first time, little did he know he'd get credit in his own holiday for ushering in a new era of colonialism. The concept of racism itself hasn't always existed. And when we understand how it originated and gained traction, we can begin to and fight back. Our story does not start in 1492. However, by then, decades of systematic kidnapping and land grabbing had already begun. Years before.
All right, my bad. And like I said, this is AI, so it's not coming up right. That's why I probably shouldn't. Hold on, I'm having problems, y'all. Give me 1 second, y'all. My bad. Hold on. All right. All right, yeah, my bad, y'all. My bad. All right, all right, hopefully I can hear it. All right, here we go. Let's see.
As Christopher Columbus, our story does not start in 1492. However, by then, decades of systematic kidnapping and land grabbing had already begun. Years before Columbus was born, the Portuguese established a trading outpost on the island of Argan, near Mauritania in 1445, as myths of the African savage spread. Of course, the Spanish and Portuguese used these myths to justify their savage crimes of kidnapping, rape, and murder. But first, we need to understand what savage means to Europeans. Typically, when they've come across a group or person who doesn't know or refuses to follow European culture, law, or bow down to European deities, they label them savages who must be shown the way to salvation. You must be Europeanized to be civilized. In reality, conquering the land, taking the resources, and enslaving the people was the goal.
Oh damn. See, yeah, this ain't working. Um. All right. See, yeah, this ain't working, y'all. So hold on. Maybe I probably shouldn't even come on here and do this because it's not working. Um. But I guess it was a good idea, right? But maybe I can find something. Yo, what up? Time to work. So let me know if y'all wanna if y'all do wanna hear this. Um All right, my bad. All right, yeah, so all right, I'll put it in here. I'm trying to find something right now that I could put it onto. All right, maybe this will work, y'all. So let's see. All right, let me see. All right, my bad. We're gonna start over. Y'all, my bad. It's technical difficulties, but we go get there. All right. So we'll still do it anyway. All right. Let me put it up here. I had to find another one real quick. So we just gonna play it and go from there. And then I'll make comments or whatever.
1492, The Doctrine of Discovery. As Christopher Columbus
Back
laid
over
eyes on
here.
the New World for the first time, little did he know he'd get
Maybe
credit
I
for his
can
own
hear it.
holiday for ushering in a new era of colonialism. The concept of racism itself hasn't always existed, and when we understand how it originated and gained traction, we can begin to fight back. Our story does not start in 1492, however. By then, decades of systematic kidnapping and land grabbing had already begun. Years before Columbus was born, the Portuguese established a trading outpost on the island of Arguin, near Mauritania in 1445, as myths of the African savage spread. Of course, the Spanish and Portuguese used these myths to justify their savage crimes of kidnapping, rape, and murder. But first we need to understand what savage means to Europeans. Typically, when they've come across a group or person who doesn't know or refuses to follow European culture, law, or bow down to European deities, they
All right, I don't know if y'all can hear me. But yeah, so I got you, bro. I got you on a copy, I'll send it to you in the email or something. I'll just send it to you. Um and before and I'll stop here, right? Because I said that, right, the concept of racism itself hasn't always existed. That does not mean race itself that there aren't differences for people or whatever. Well, it might have to be an email, Raw, for me to send it to you, unless like you email me your address or something, and then I'll send you one. But yeah, I got you. Otherwise, but the concept of racism, like judging other people based off your skin tone and the melanin and the jealousy that they have for us being who we are, that is what they started creating, right? And you see here is way before 1492, right? So even as 1445, as they going through the Black Plague and all of that stuff that's going on in Europe. But anyway, on to the next part.
typically, when they've come across a group or person who doesn't know or refuses to follow European culture, law, or bow down to European deities, they label them savages who must be shown the way to salvation. You must be Europeanized to be civilized. In reality, conquering the land, taking the resources, and enslaving the people was the goal. But to sleep at night, they told themselves the people weren't human, only savages. In 1441, Portuguese sailors took the first kidnapped West Africans back to Europe. In 1444, 235 more were captured, effectively beginning the slave trade. By the end of June 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull called the Dum Diversas. It granted Spain and Portugal full permission to search out, invade, capture, and subjugate non-believers of Christ. The goal of the Catholic Church was to reduce non-Christians or pagans into perpetual servitude while taking their land. Nicholas V issued a follow-up papal bull in 1455. The Romanus Pontifex extended Catholic nations of Europe dominion over discovered land. When Columbus entered the picture, when Columbus entered the picture,
All right, yeah, I got you, Raw. Yeah, that's why I was just sending it to you on an email or something, right? But yeah, you see it as early as the 1440s, right? Probably 1438 I've seen before, right? They started kidnapping people off the west coast of Africa and taking them back to Europe, you know. And y'all should look up the Papa Bulls, the Dum Diversa, right? And this is where they have this well, the Catholic Church, right, was to their goal was to invade, capture, and subjugate um non-believers in Christ, you know what I'm saying? So to spread that Christianity stuff, right? But even if you accepted it, which we'll see soon, you know, it didn't matter, you know. They just wanted to do what Europeans do, which is conquer, you know.
when Columbus entered the picture, Portuguese and Spanish routes were already established. Funded by Spain and aided by the Nino brothers and other melanated crew members, Columbus landed in the Caribbean region in 1492. They never made it to North
Shouts
America
out to
or
Coco
India,
in the building.
despite calling the natives Indians. After Columbus found They never made it to North America or India, despite calling the natives Indians. After Columbus found gold and other natural resources, greed took over. He destroyed and pillaged his way to Hispaniola. More important than gold, Columbus saw the value of the native people as laborers. He saw how welcoming and naive they were, yet unable to protect themselves.
And by the way, you know, and like I said, if anybody wants to come up here, you definitely welcome to come up here and talk or whatever and say what you got to say. But yeah, so right, he saw how important the value of the people as laborers, right? But he also noticed how welcoming and naive they were, and some would say are, and unable to protect themselves, right? So they saw from the very beginning you as this savage, you know, like, and that's something that just doesn't bow down to them, you know, and their goal is to beat you into submission,
More
you know.
important than gold, Columbus saw the value of the native people as laborers. He saw how welcoming and naive they were, yet unable to protect themselves. Columbus took gold and other resources, including people, back to Spain. He wanted to show how easy they were to enslave and send more troops to take the land. In addition to guns, Europeans brought diseases, making it easier for them to capture natives. Still, Columbus felt he wasn't getting as much gold as he wanted. He made his second trip in 1493, despite doubts about the legality of slave trading. Several hundred people were shipped from Hispaniola to Spain. Countless more were captured, and Columbus forced him to mine gold. When anyone resisted, he cut off their hands, feet, ears, tongue, or simply beheaded them. Women and little girls were viciously raped. If they resisted, they were beaten into submission. Babies were taken out of their mothers' arms and fed to attack dogs. Entire villages were burned. Even Columbus's peers condemned his actions, saying they'd never seen anything so savage. When Spanish rulers learned of Columbus's crimes, he was stripped of his title as governor, arrested, and shipped back to Spain. Although Columbus once called the natives peaceful and nice, to justify his crimes, he said, "They are evil, they eat men, they're savage cannibals with dog-like noses that drink their victims' blood." Many Spaniards, including the king, opposed Columbus being arrested. King Ferdinand freed Columbus, restored his wealth, and agreed to fund one last voyage.
Now, look at it's just the savage nature they are, you know what I'm saying? And um even the other Europeans was looking at him like, yo, what the hell is you doing? Like, yo, you wilding. And they are savages just like him. They was doing the same pillaging, but he was taking it to another level that he even got charged for his crimes. And then you have the king of the Spaniards, right? who's sitting there like, well, hey, I'm on Columbus side. Let me give him his stuff back and even fund you to go somewhere else again, right? But when they, like you said, when they resisted, he cut off their hands, feet, tongue, or just beheaded them, right? And if they resisted, they beat them into submission, right? And that whole thing with attack dogs and feeding babies to dogs, they didn't ask why the babies. You know what I mean? So.
Pope Alexander VI also sided with Columbus, issuing another papal bull in 1493. The Inter Caetera gave Spain and Portugal rights to lands west and south of Cape Verde. However, one Christian nation had no right to conquer land already conquered by another Christian nation. Incidentally, the illegitimate son of Alexander VI was Cesare Borgia. Some say the image of Jesus we've seen growing up in black churches and homes is actually Borgia.
It's Caesar Borgia, but you know this AI stuff can't read it, you know. Well, y'all know it better than me. I'm probably saying it wrong. But yeah, that white Jesus in your house is probably this dude. You know, that's what I've heard. That's what y'all be saying, you know. But that's interesting. And like I said, correct me if I'm wrong. If y'all still listening, you know, I know my brother Koku know a lot of stuff. So if I'm wrong about this stuff,
The
let me know.
Portuguese and Spanish were in a race to conquer land and enslave people. Genocides on the native population were so frequent, they nearly went extinct. Europeans agreed trafficking in Africans was the best way to replace the slave population. Ferdinand II allowed enslaved Africans to be brought into Spanish colonies for the first time in 1501. His only condition was they already be Christianized. Jews, Moors, and newly converted Christians were forbidden. While countless people were kidnapped, the King of Congo was baptized by Portuguese officials. Afonso I became the first Catholic king in Congo in 1506. One of the earliest recorded slave shipments arrived in the New World in 1502. Juan de Córdoba was the first merchant identified who was authorized by the Spanish to send slaves, although it was in very small numbers. By the time the first kidnapped Africans reached Hispaniola in 1511, Ponce de Leon was sent looking for more gold. He landed in Florida, which included the Carolinas, and claimed the land for Spain by 1513. De Leon and his crew encountered hostility from an unwelcoming native tribe and were forced back to their ships. Although there were many
Yeah, and by the way, I just thought about it. When we was in school and they was teaching us about this dude, they was talking about something. He was looking for the fountain of youth. Now, I don't know if that's like a metaphor or similar or some weird European kind of thing where they it's like, oh, the fountain of youth. He was looking for probably more gold and people to kidnap and steal. You know what I'm saying? Looking for more resources. I guess that was their fountain of youth. But that's what I learned about this dude when I was in school. And it's crazy that I even learned about this dude and probably nothing else in here.
De Leon and his crew encountered hostility from an unwelcoming native tribe and were forced back to their ships. Although there were many tribes in Florida, the Calusa tribe was the only tribe that was identified. When de Leon returned in 1521, they attacked again, mortally wounding him. Everyone didn't just go quietly, many people fought for their lives. They keep most history out of most books, but people have been fighting colonialism since day one. The revolt of Enriquillo was one of the earliest recorded rebellions between 1519 to 1533. Enriquillo, Enrique, created an army of rebels armed with whatever weapons they could find, be it a rock, stick, or a spear they made. Enriquillo told them to only fight in self-defense, only kill in battle, and if possible, to just try to disarm them. They were
Now, do you hear that right? And this was like one of the first black and brown unities, or so you thought, you know what I'm saying? And maybe I would have fell for it at this time, right? So we ain't looking at it, but this was the first black and brown try to thing. But even then, he was like, only fight in self-defense, only kill in battle, and if possible, don't kill them at all, just try to disarm them. Like, what the hell? Do you not know who you dealing with?
Enriquillo told them to only fight in self-defense, only kill in battle, and if possible, to just try to disarm them. They were successful enough to force the Spanish to offer a peace treaty, but the damage was already done. Weapons and diseases took its toll on the people, not to mention suicides in mass numbers. Women killed their children and aborted babies to avoid a life of slavery because to them, death is better was bondage. Some believe Wolof African slaves taught the Taino rebels how to organize and defend themselves against the Spanish. They also led the Santo Domingo slave revolt of 1521, or the Great Wolof Scare.
Shouts out to Matron in the building. I don't know how some of these, it doesn't say that. It was death is better than bondage. That's what I had in the thing. Anyway, my bad. Shouts out to Matron in the building. I appreciate it, you know. And only reason I'm doing this now, cause and shouts out to everybody that supported, you know, it's been like what I don't know, like nine yeah, so far it's been 99 since it says February 13th, you know. So shouts out, it's 87 here, and then here is another 12, which is probably like libraries or something, and like Barnes and Noble and stuff. So just to do that, I wanted to come on here. And the thing is, like, a lot of them racist dudes be like listening to it and be trying to like put in negative reviews and all sorts of stuff, you know. So I wanted to come back and do that.
Some believe Wolof African slaves taught the Taino rebels how to organize and defend themselves against the Spanish. They also led the Santo Domingo slave revolt of 1521, or the Great Wolof Scare. Although
Hold on 1 second, y'all. My bad. Give me 1 second. Oh damn, I was on mute the whole time. My bad, yo. I was talking the whole time. But yo, I see what's going on. This thing is skipping some lines that that I have in the book. You know what I'm saying? It's skipping like whole paragraphs and stuff. Um, so all right, my bad, y'all. I just had to see that, you know. I had to make sure something is right. It's skipping parts of it. That's what is going on. That's why it's the problem with playing this random AI stuff, you know. But it is what it is. It's good enough so far right now. So there we go.
although it's unclear if it took place around Christmas 1521 or January
Damn, I can't
1522,
hear it
it
again.
was the first time African slaves joined with the indigenous population to fight enslavement. According to oral traditions, the revolt was led by a Wolof couple, Maria Alofa and Gonzalo Mandinga, on a Nueva Isabella plantation owned by Diego Colon, the son of Christopher Columbus. Although they were seeking freedom, according to the Spanish, their goal was to kill all Christians and take over the land. They attacked farms and plantations, taking resources, weapons, and freeing other slaves, many of whom joined them. After a few days, the rebellion was put down by a militia led by Colon. The alleged leaders of the rebellion was executed and the others were harshly punished. By
All right, my bad, y'all. I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties. I don't know. Maybe I probably shouldn't be doing this, but it is what it is. Um, and I'm only doing this part anyway, so y'all can get the rest, you know. So, of course, y'all see Diego Colon, of course, is the son of Christopher Columbus or whatever, you know. And so after this, what they call the Great Wool Scare, right, where it was this black and brown unity, and I guess it left out the part where they stabbed you in the back. What the hell? It's like skipping whole parts and paragraphs, and like I don't know what the hell happened. I just copied and pasted, so um all right, so I don't know. All right, or maybe I'm tripping. Right, so no, it left out the whole part, right? But all right, here we go.
By January 6, 1521, Colon introduced the first race-based laws in the New World. Both free and enslaved Africans' access to weapons was minimized and were restricted from moving around freely. Anyone found guilty of leading a rebellion was to be put to death, while everyone else was to be tortured. Still, throughout the 1530s there were several more attempts to end colonization. Despite resistance, the slave trade escalated significantly. King Charles I of Spain granted the first licenses to transport Africans to the New World in 1518. More than 4,000 people were imported, and thousands more were sent each year after that. As more Europeans arrived in the Americas, the violence intensified and the race for the New World persisted. By 1521, Hernán Cortés already destroyed the Aztec Empire, and the Inca Empire was gone by 1533. Spanish colonizers landed in what became Georgia and South Carolina in 1526. They brought 100 enslaved Africans with them, possibly the first enslaved Africans taken to North America. With the help of nearby natives, the enslaved Africans set fire to the colony and escaped by blending in with native tribes in what was known as the San Miguel de Gualdape Rebellion. The African population in Hispaniola grew to over 30,000 by 1542. With the native population decimated, the Spanish decided to abolish Indian slavery in their colonies. The next year, a Spanish decree prohibited enslaving Muslims that were converted to Christianity. But in 1550, the Portuguese sent the first slaves to Brazil that were kidnapped directly from Africa. Upon their arrival, uprisings spread throughout the Caribbean like wildfire. Between 1550 to 1552, the first insurrections in Nicaragua, Peru, Venezuela, as well as the Buyano Wars in Panama took place. King Buyano and his army were able to defeat the Spanish. They freed themselves and established their own community with natives in the area. During his reign, King Buyano attacked several Spanish slave markets and freed as many people as possible. He forced the Spanish governor to offer a treaty, but it was only a trap. When Buyano and his men met with the Spanish to sign the treaty unarmed, they were poisoned. Africans outnumbered Europeans.
So you see that, man, even then, right? When they had the first insurrections in Nicaragua and all that stuff, they beat them, right? And then they was like, oh yeah, well, you know, we'll negotiate. And then when they came to go sign a treaty, it was a trap and they ended up killing them, right? Well, they poisoned them. So they even did that by deception, you know? That's just how they operate, you know?
Africans outnumbered Europeans 15 to 1 in Hispaniola by 1560. The first major example on record of England participating in the slave trade wasn't until 1562. English sailors transported 300 Africans from Sierra Leone to Hispaniola. They illegally traded with the Spanish, contributing to growing tensions between England and Spain. As England got a taste of the slave trade, the Spanish continued to expand. They established their first permanent colony in Florida, officially introducing slavery in North America. The problem for the Spanish was it also introduced successful revolts.
All right, I know it was blowing me off because it's reading it in the AI voice, and it's like not the way that a person should read it. So it's sounding like I'm like, what the hell? All right, but here we go.
The problem for the Spanish was it also introduced successful revolts. Gaspar Yanga, known as the first liberator of the Americas, led the first successful slave revolt in Mexico in 1570. Gaspar helped establish one of the first black colonies in the New World. They were able to live among themselves for nearly 40 years until the Spanish militia attacked them in 1609. Using the terrain to their advantage, Gaspar and his followers pushed the Spanish back. They forced the Spanish to agree to Gaspar's terms, including freedom, and signed a peace treaty in 1618. The town of San Lorenzo de los Negros was officially recognized as a free black settlement. African nations also continued to push back. In the Battle of the Lucala in 1590, the Matamba and Indongo armies united to defeat the Portuguese. But the Portuguese didn't give up so easily. They launched attacks on Angola from 1618 to 1622 until Nzinga Mbande was invited to join peace negotiations. Despite signing treaties, the Portuguese didn't keep their word and continued to attack and kidnap people. After Queen Nzinga's brother died, she took over in 1624. Queen Nzinga tried her best to strengthen the peace treaty. She even converted to Christianity, got baptized, and adopted the name Anna. It didn't take Queen Nzinga long to learn the hard way. Treaties with Europeans don't mean much.
I would have said don't mean but I couldn't say that. But shouts out to Queen Nzinga. But you see here, right, when the two African tribes, nations, whatever you want to call it, united, they were able to defeat the Portuguese, right? But then that's when, and tribal differences amongst ourselves, you know what I'm saying, always gets in the way of it. And even though Queen Nzinga tried to her best, right, to be like, hey, let me just talk it out with them. She tried to talk it out, right, after Queen Nzinga, because she realized that talking don't work. So anything after Queen Nzinga trying to talk, then I don't know what we doing here.
Queen Nzinga was forced to flee by 1626, but she was a warrior that refused to accept defeat. After taking over Matamba, she realized she would have to fight back a different way. Queen Nzinga built an army by allowing Africans that escaped slavery into her kingdom. She also organized mercenaries that were trained by the Portuguese. She even formed alliances with former rivals, and went as far as marrying the chief of the Mbangala to increase her army. Queen Nzinga hand-picked soldiers to infiltrate Portuguese armies and get information to attack from the inside. She also used feuds between European nations to her advantage, becoming allies with the Dutch. By always encouraging insurrections and pitting Europeans against each other, Queen Nzinga was able to create an anti-Portuguese coalition. She kept them at bay for decades. When the Portuguese got word of Queen Nzinga's feats, they sent an army to retake the land in 1644, but they were defeated. However, after the Dutch were forced to retreat, the Portuguese sent the largest army Queen Nzinga would ever have to face. After being defeated in 1648, Nzinga retreated to change strategy. She began using guerrilla warfare tactics to fight a bigger army. She even led troops into battle when she was over the age of 60. Eventually, Queen Nzinga focused more on building her nation into a superpower. By the time she died, Europeans were forced to recognize her as an equal. Queen Nzinga and her father continued the fight against the Portuguese and other colonizers. But with superior weapons, Europeans ultimately gained control. Portugal and Spain dominated the slave.
Now let's be clear, right? Because I did say I shouldn't have said like recognize her as our equal, because that puts us on the terms of like, yeah, well, no, if she put enough fear in their heart to where they just wouldn't do any and whatever to her because they realized that she wasn't having it and she was gonna fight back no matter what, right? But then of course after she died, I don't know, like shouts out to Queen Nzinga who has that spirit, you know. I wish more of us had that Queen Nzinga spirit.
Portugal and Spain dominated the slave trade until the 1600s. After Elizabeth I died in 1603, her successor, King James, took over. Within a year, he reached a treaty with Spain, giving the British access to the New World. The treaty also gave the British access to the papal bulls, collectively known as the Doctrine of Discovery. The British established their first permanent colony in Jamestown, VA, in 1607. After previous attempts to establish the Jamestown colony failed, the British initially struggled, nearly suffering the same fate.
Failed.
In what was called the starving time, most of them died. Those who survived resorted to cannibalism and boiling leather to drink. With expressions like, "He who does not work will not eat," the British were on the verge of abandoning Jamestown. However, the natives showed them how to cultivate the land and what they could or couldn't eat. Once they learned to grow their own food and tobacco, they could sustain themselves. More Europeans were sent to the New World as indentured servants.
No. See, that's the thing, right? They was resorted to let's say resorted to cannibalism. I don't know if that's resorting to it or that's just what they do, right? Because now, what they, I don't know, but it's always gonna be some Negroes that be like, "Yo, we got to save them. Let's just show them how to do it. Let's teach them how to." And the things that you get every time is getting stabbed in the back. That's what I've learned in the first few interactions that we had with them. And I'll say this, right? If anybody is out there, let me know if y'all want to go to the second chapter or not. Um, hopefully it'll work, but if not, then I'll just say forget it. Or if nobody say nothing, I'll stop right there. But if y'all want to, just say yeah. If not, then I'll end it right after these last couple paragraphs.
Melanated people have generally always accepted and welcomed Europeans with open arms. Far too often, it has come back to bite them. There's also resistance dating back to 1454 when colonizers reported being attacked by 150 men. Some believed white Christians were bad people who ate the flesh of people they kidnapped. There may even be truth behind it. Historically, Europeans have always been fascinated with the power of melanin and the culture of the people. Europeans said, "These Negroes didn't." Europeans said,
Now, I want you to see that, right? There's also resistance dating back to 1454, right? When they have reports or whatever, this is according to their records, that they were attacked by 150 brothers, you know what I'm saying? Who was probably on the shores like and and they said it too in the book the Delectable Negro about how they believed and they was probably right to believe it, that Christians were bad people who ate the flesh of the people who they kidnapped, you know what I'm saying? And that's what and they was probably right, most likely they were right. So we've always been fighting back, and they've always been who they are.
there's also resistance dating back to 1454 when colonizers reported being attacked by 150 men. Some believed white Christians were bad people who ate the flesh of people they kidnapped. There may even be truth behind it. Historically, Europeans have always been fascinated with the power of melanin and the culture of the people. Europeans said, "These Negroes didn't want their friendship on any terms, only to slaughter them all and sacrifice their possessions to their gods." Africans who chose to embrace Europeans traded animals and other goods in exchange for.
Now, he read that like AI, right? So let me say, right? Europeans have always been fascinated with the power of melanin in our culture, right? And but what they were saying was like, you know how we be like, oh, love everybody, be friends. What I'm saying here is they said that Europeans said these Negroes don't want to be our friends on any terms. We only want to slaughter them and sacrifice them and their possessions to our gods and stuff. You know how they be saying we like that voodoo stuff. You know, that's they were saying the same thing then. You know, but we was like, oh no, you know, well, come on in, paleface. You know, I'll teach you how to farm and stuff so you can sustain yourself. Okay, okay, chapter two. I got you, Raw. All right, I'll play chapter two.
Africans who chose to embrace Europeans traded animals and other goods in exchange for iron, copper, and tobacco. They were often betrayed, and Europeans took more than agreed on. They didn't only use brute force to conquer. One of their main tools is deception, along with the divide and conquer technique.
Oh, okay, yo, this is like that African. So, I guess, well, you know, y'all can just hear it later or get it or whatever. But Africans who chose to embrace Europeans traded animals and other goods in exchange for copper, iron, and tobacco. But they were often betrayed, and Europeans took more than agreed on. They didn't just use brute force to conquer, right? One of the main tools is deception, along with divide and conquer techniques, right? So, like when they even because you be like, hey, I'm gonna go get some, trying to get weapons or something, and they end up kidnapping you, you know? So, like the ones who tried to work with them, they was even stealing the basic stuff that they were giving them, you know? So,
Africans who chose to embrace Europeans traded animals and other goods in exchange for iron, copper, and tobacco. They were often betrayed, and Europeans took more than agreed on. They didn't only use brute force to conquer. One of their main tools is deception, along with the divide and conquer technique. To this day, many use talking points like Africans sold other Africans into slavery to justify the barbaric crimes against humanity. However, notice when someone's regurgitating what they've heard, they're never specific about which nation, leader, or tribe was involved, nor the time period. Don't let them get away with it. Ask yourself, if Europeans sold slaves and became wealthy, Arabs sold slaves and became wealthy, Americans sold slaves and became wealthy, why did Africans sell their own people and lose everything? By 1610, the Portuguese already turned the Dahomey Kingdom into a slave trading state. Europeans fought each other for control of slave ports along the coast. They went from nation to nation with superior weapons, threatening to enslave or murder the people if they didn't capture others. Africans still didn't understand the level of deception they were dealing with. There were cases of Africans selling captives in exchange for weapons for self-defense, but they were only one day away from being tricked and kidnapped themselves. In one case, an African slave trader, Daga, was tricked into getting on.
look, I'm gonna be real with y'all. Is there always gonna be coons? Yes, there is. Or clones? Yes, there is, right? Always gonna be a Negro that will sell you down the river, right? There is Sheriff David Clark was this dude here, the African slave trader, Daga, or whatever his name was, you know. And listen to what happened to that brother, you know what I'm saying?
In one case, an African slave trader, Daga, was tricked into getting on the boat. He was shipped to Cuba where it is said he led his own mutiny. Like in modern times, I'm sure there were those who'd sell out their own people for whatever reason. An African chief, in Dorkstu, had been trading slaves in exchange for guns and other resources until he found out his relatives were being tricked and kidnapped during the exchanges. Other leaders that traded with Europeans like Madame Tinubu of Nigeria and King Afonso I of Congo realized the inhumane treatment of the people that were taken. After King Afonso wrote letters to the Portuguese about his concerns, he became a target and was almost assassinated. Many started to resist the slave trade, but it was already too late. Africans realized the people taken away on the big ships weren't coming back. When they heard stories about what was happening to them, many nations tried to fight back, but simply lacked the firepower. Not to mention, the Arab slave trade had already been going on for 1,000 years. Religious, political, and tribal differences also made it difficult to overcome language barriers and unify. Once captured, they faced
I don't know about that now that I think about it. We all speak English now. We understand English. We still can't get freaking unified. What the hell? So never mind. I'll scratch that line out.
religious, political, and tribal differences also made it difficult to overcome language barriers and unify. Once captured, they faced conditions in slave ports so horrible, many died before they were sent away. They were kept in dark dungeons for months at a time, crammed into small spaces in chains, forced to defecate on themselves and each other. This behavior may have been normal in European society, but was unheard of and unimaginable to the natives and Africans. Many people killed themselves and their children because the ancestors knew that death was better than bondage.
Alright. Alright, so alright, I'm gonna do part 2. Let me see if I can put it back on here. I appreciate the love, Raw, and everybody that's listening. I guess nobody disagreed with anything, or I guess y'all have gone away, or one of the two. But it is what it is. I guess it's true, or it was. But it's bigger than me. So like, yo, there's something bigger than me told me to do this, and it's not even for me. So I think that we should have our history in a place. So like, and our history goes back beyond any of this stuff, which I said in the beginning. This ain't about what we should call ourselves, what we come from, and none of that stuff. I am speaking English right now because I've been colonized by the Europeans. I don't know my last name. And so this is a part of what led me to get to where I am, and it's meant to be passed down to the next generation. So we know, because we don't learn none of this stuff in school. I didn't learn none of this stuff. But all right, let's go to I'll just finish with this one. And y'all let me know if y'all ever want me to do it again in the future. It'll be more prepared. I guess I can't mess it up because, like I said, it's bigger than me. And also, you see, most of the talking points that they use is like easily debunked. Because if Africans sold other Africans, how come the Africans is poor? All right. My bad. I ain't even sharing it. All right, here we go.
Chapter 2. 1619, The Casual Killing Act. When 20 and odd Negroes landed near Jamestown in 1619, many marked it as the beginning of slavery in North America. Of course, both free and enslaved Africans were already here. Many choose 1619 because the British created the 13 colonies. There's a common misnomer: the first Africans brought into the colonies were slaves. However, when they arrived, they were labeled and sold as indentured servants. There's a huge difference between slavery for life and indentured servitude. Just ask the Irish. Indentured servants only worked for a period, then were released and paid dues.
Yo, and by the way, the Irish can tell you they Irish. You know what I'm saying? You ask a black person where they come from, what's they this, what's they that. We don't know. No matter where you think you come from, it's hard to be specific, and there's a reason for that.
As brutal as Europeans were, they still abided by the doctrine of discovery, somewhat following the rules of slavery. If you were Christianized and accepted the ways of the Englishman, you could earn your freedom and maybe even acquire land. Many of the first Africans to arrive were already Christianized and given European names. It's important to note, unlike many Europeans who agreed to come to the New World as servants, Africans didn't choose to come of their own free will. Antony and Isabella Negro were among the first 20 and odd Negroes that arrived. They eventually gave birth to a son, William Tucker, becoming the first African family on record in the colony. Black and white servants were treated as relatively equal at the time. Still, by 1639, Virginia passed a law specifically excluding Negroes from the right to arm themselves with weapons. Despite the myth of the African savage, slavery and indentured servitude weren't based solely on race. But things quickly changed for the worse. In 1640,
And their concept of it was being developed. And you see, even before all of this stuff, right? You had the certain laws that was passed in other areas, right? Or, you know, like in the areas in Hispaniola and stuff like that, right? After the rebellion, then you already see them trying not to arm people. But then it was like, understand this, what they tell you today, if you accept the ways of the Englishmen, right, and adopt Christianity and all of that stuff, then there's a chance you could be free, right? This is the dream that they have sold you, right? But things quickly change for the worse, you know.
in 1640, a Dutchman named Victor, a Scotsman named James, and an African named John Punch tried to escape servitude under a wealthy planter named Hugh Gwynn. All three were caught and sent back to Virginia. They were all sentenced to receive lashes and pay dues for any losses incurred. Victor and James were ordered to serve an additional 4 years in servitude. However, John Punch was sentenced to serve Gwynn for the rest of his natural life. Essentially, he became the first slave on record in the British colonies.
Now, they love to say the first slave owner was the black dude, Anthony Johnson, which is clearly false. 1640 is before that, right? So, it was a white dude named Hugh Gwynn. So when they say all of that stuff, you know, it's some BS, right? So on record, right, this brother was enslaved for life. Now the two white boys, they got like 4 years or whatever. That's like if you do a crime with two white dudes and they get like a couple years in jail, but you got to do life, you know. And he ended up serving them for the rest of his natural life, you know.
This was the first significant difference in treatment based on race in the American court system, and we've been disproportionately impacted ever since. In 1641, Matthias de Souza became the only person of African descent elected to colonial Maryland's General Assembly, despite arriving as an indentured servant.
Oh, and by the way, when I say that, and the of African descent, that means a mulatto person. You know what I'm saying? Most times it means a mulatto person. It sounds like he was a Spaniard and a Negro mixed. You know what I'm saying? Or something like that. But usually when they say a person of African descent, meaning he was probably a mulatto or either his grandma was black or something like that.
The Pilgrims didn't land on Plymouth Rock until 1620. They were the outcasts and criminals of England. When they arrived, most of the native population had already died out from violence and diseases brought by Europeans. The few that remained welcomed the Pilgrims with open arms. The natives introduced them to their culture and treated them like family. They showed them what they could eat, how to fish, and how to cultivate the land. By the next year, the harvest was so successful, the Pilgrims and natives feasted for 3 days, giving birth to the myth of Thanksgiving. Before the Pilgrims landed, they signed the Mayflower Compact. They agreed to follow English law but self-govern themselves separately from the Virginia colony. The Virginia colony was founded for economic reasons and consisted mostly of men. The Plymouth colony comprised of more women and families. Pilgrims were escaping religious persecution themselves and preached the Bible more than anyone. Yet, they were the first to legalize slavery officially in Massachusetts in 1641. In 1642, Virginia passed laws to distinguish black women from all other women. Multiple statutes required every youth 16 and up to pay taxes, including Negro women. All other women were exempt, regardless of age. Laws like these made it more difficult for black women to find partners. When black women married, their husbands were forced to pay more taxes. Despite the odds, the first black marriage on record took place in New Amsterdam in 1641. But Virginia was just getting started.
Now, understand this, right? The Pilgrims, who was up in like Pennsylvania and all that stuff, they was on a whole different thing, right? From the Virgin, they were two separate kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, entities or whatever. You know, they wanted to be separate from each other. Now, these was the ones that was in jail and all that. Well, they call it religious persecution. But the Pilgrims was such a, well, I guess they competed with each other or how sick they could be. You know what I'm saying?
But Virginia was just getting started.
Oh, because in like I said, they already passed laws to distinguish between black women, right? To make it harder for marriage. But they also, I think I said, or maybe it got left out. But I also said that in I think 1639, maybe you read it already, I don't know, but they were the first to legalize selling children, I think, you know, the Pilgrims up in the Plymouth Rock, you know.
But Virginia was just getting started. In 1642, they passed one of the first fugitive slave laws in the colonies. Anyone who helped a slave escape was fined in pounds of tobacco. The second time a slave was caught trying to escape, they branded the slave with the letter R. The New England Confederation adopted their own fugitive slave laws in 1643. However, slavery wasn't legalized in Connecticut until 1650. Not to be outdone, the Dutch introduced new rules regarding slavery in New Netherlands. They required ex-slaves to give fixed amounts of their crops to the Dutch West India Company after being freed. Rhode Island was one of the few places to pass laws restricting slavery. It was forbidden for anyone to be enslaved for more than 10 years, but the law was rarely enforced. As race-based slavery in the colonies took shape, there is a false notion that the first slave owner in America was black. While Anthony Johnson may have been the first black slave owner on record, his case wasn't decided until 15 years after John Punch was sentenced. Anthony arrived from Angola in 1621. He was one of the few who survived, despite diseases and wars with the natives, including the Powhatan attack of 1622. Eventually, he earned his freedom, acquired land, and adopted the name Anthony Johnson. As one of the few landowners in Virginia of any race, Anthony purchased both black and white indentured servants. After his plantation burned down in 1653, a court agreed to exempt Anthony and his wife Mary from paying taxes for the rest of their lives. The courts.
Now you see, this brother thought he was in there, right? And maybe we would have even believed it in 1650 something, right? But after this time, right, well, I guess we will see what happens, right? Because it was like, hey, even your house burned down, so you don't even have to pay taxes, and you can have white and servants and all that stuff, you know. So
The court's ruling was in direct defiance of a statute requiring all free Negro men and women to pay taxes to the Crown. Most Africans weren't getting the land they were promised. In 1654, Anthony's neighbor, Robert Parker, convinced a servant named John Caser to run away. Parker told John he was being illegally detained and he'd help him escape. When Anthony found out, he sued Parker and John Caser for his return. Parker was a white planter himself, and initially, the court ruled in his favor. But after an appeal in 1655, the court reversed the decision. Parker was ordered to pay dues to Anthony, and John Caser was returned, despite arguing his contract was expired. Anthony Johnson's story was unique for several reasons. While he wasn't the only black landowner, he was likely seen as a black Englishman. Not only did he live in a small window in American history where race wasn't the biggest issue, unlike other free Africans, the courts also ruled in his favor. However, within a few years, racism became a systematic institution. Anthony and his family were forced to move to Maryland. When he died in 1670, an all-white jury ruled that Anthony's land and property, including his servants, could be seized by the state. They said, because he was a Negro and by consequence an alien, he wasn't entitled to the same rights as whites. The 50 acres of land Anthony left his family was given to his neighbor's son George Parker, although his son Richard lived there for 5 years. In the North, the Pilgrims had already passed race-based laws by 1656. Massachusetts prohibited Negroes from arming themselves or training in the militia, reversing a statute from 4 years earlier. New Hampshire and New York soon followed. Connecticut also banned free Negroes from joining the militia by 1660. Although Pilgrims led the way in legalizing slavery, the Virginia colony passed laws that created the basis for chattel slavery and modern race relations. The first anti-miscegenation law was passed in Virginia in 1661. The statute said, if any white Christian commits fornication with a Negro man or woman, they'd be fined. By 1662, Virginia enacted the hereditary law. Every child born to an enslaved woman inherited the status of the mother. There is a reason colonizers went against the English and biblical law of, you are what your father is.
All right, so basically they was like, oh, well, you ain't what your father is no more. No, they'd be like, well, yeah, oh, what your father is. Nah, not when it comes to this. They go against their own religious doctrine, right? When it comes to enslaving you, now you're all who your mother is. And perpetual means forever. It means to this day right here, right now. You know what I'm saying? So they went against their own English law, right? About the son inherits the father's, in biblical law of you are what your father is, you know what I'm saying? Because it allowed them to be able to rape black women, right? And then enslave the offspring that comes from that crime that they did.
It allowed him to still have sexual access to black women and enslave their own children. If a Negro woman under an indentured contract produced a child with the owner, consensual or not, they were forced to serve an additional 2 years. Although these laws mostly affected white males and black women relations, white women weren't exempt. When white women were caught sleeping with a black man, they were heavily fined. If they couldn't afford to pay the fine, they were forced into servitude.
Damn.
By 1663, a Maryland law presumed all Africans coming into the colony were slaves. Any free European woman married to an African man lost their freedom as well. If any children were produced, they were automatically considered slaves. Basically, if either of your parents were black, you were born enslaved. South Carolina began granting slave owners 20 acres of land for every male slave and 10 acres for every female slave they brought into the colony. Meanwhile, in Gloucester County, Virginia, the first documented slave revolt in the colonies took place in 1663. The Gloucester Conspiracy, aka the Birkenhead Rebellion, was the first time African, Native, and European servants attempted to unite against their enslavers. They armed themselves and planned to march to the governor's mansion to demand freedom. If the governor resisted, they'd threaten to use violence and take freedom by any means. Before they got to the governor, a black servant named John Birkenhead informed authorities. Many of them were captured and beheaded. As a reward, Birkenhead received 5 pounds of tobacco and his freedom, although it probably didn't help him or his descendants in the long run. By 1664, Virginia made a clear distinction between European servants and Africans facing perpetual servitude. Virginia began to make Negro synonymous with slave. Soon New York, New Jersey, the Carolinas, and Maryland followed suit. Maryland also enacted a law forbidding marriage between white women and black men. As much blood as Europeans spilled, they still followed the doctrine of discovery. But in 1667, Virginia passed a law to ensure baptizing Negroes wouldn't save them from bondage. Albeit rare.
Now you hear that? And since 1667, all right, being a Christian has not saved you since then, right? Maybe if this was 1666 and you was like, yeah, I'm a Christian, I'll be like, yo, good luck, go to court. But now after 1667, all right, especially where I'm at, like, yeah, what good is that gonna do you?
Albeit rare, before this law, black people could be granted freedom if they proved to the court they'd accepted the ways of the Englishman and were baptized. Elizabeth Key Grinstead was one of the few to win a freedom suit. Elizabeth's father, Thomas Key, was an Englishman, but
Oh, and by the way, she was also a mulatto, that played into it, right? So because they leave that stuff out, right? They be like, they mix up the histories and stuff, and they be like, well, look, this happened, but they leave out the fact that they was slave owners. They were byproduct of rape, by white boy raping a black woman.
Elizabeth Key Grinstead was one of the few to win a freedom suit. Elizabeth's father, Thomas Key, was an Englishman, but her mother was enslaved. Although Key denied being Elizabeth's father, he was charged and convicted. Key was a member of the Virginia House of Burgess and was forced to support her. After baptizing Elizabeth, he arranged for apprenticeships to teach her skills. After Key died, Elizabeth was sold to John Mottram. When Elizabeth's indenture ended, Mottram refused to let her go for years. Mottram eventually brought in more servants, including William Grinstead. Elizabeth and William went on to marry and had a child. When Mottram died, Elizabeth was listed as a Negro and faced being sold again. Grinstead was a white lawyer and convinced her to file a freedom suit for her and their son. She argued she was the daughter of a white man and a Christian, thus it was against English law to enslave her. She won her freedom, but within a few years, others weren't so lucky. By the late 1660s, England enacted stricter laws on enslaved Africans in the colonies. Slaves were forbidden from leaving the plantation without a pass, and never on Sunday. They were prohibited from owning weapons. Slaves were even forbidden from owning horns, whistles, or anything they could use to send messages. To make matters worse, Virginia passed the Casual Killing Act in 1669. Many feel it's still in effect in policing today. The Casual Killing Act declared, if any slave resist his master, or other by his master's order correcting him, and by the extremity of the correction should chance to die, that his death shall not be a computed felony, but the master, or that other person appointed by the master to punish him, be acquit from molestation, since it cannot be assumed that malice, which alone makes murder a felony, should induce any man to destroy his own estate. It also legalized raping enslaved black women. They didn't assume that was malicious either. To solidify the new race-based laws, in 1670, Virginia passed legislation to enslave all non-Christians, non-whites, that arrived by ship. In addition, free Negroes and natives were forbidden from owning any white Christian servants. Many say the Casual Killing Act was created to protect white women and their cruel treatment of slaves, including enslaved children. Not to be outdone, the Pilgrims in Massachusetts passed a law as sick as it was cruel and devastating to the black family. Perhaps for the first time in history, a law was passed allowing children to be separated from their families and sold. Many Pilgrims in Massachusetts came from Barbados and the West Indies, bringing their slave codes with them. The so-called Puritans pushed the Bible while preaching melanated people weren't human and were inferior. Most Pilgrims that came to the colonies brought that mindset with them. By 1661, the slave codes in Barbados denied black people the most basic human rights. The law stated, if any Negro or slave whatsoever shall offer any violence to any Christian by striking or any other form of violence, such Negro or slave shall for his or her first offense be severely whipped by the constable. For the second offense, they'd slit their noses and burn part of their face with an iron. Other codes ensured Negroes wouldn't get a legal trial with a jury of their peers. The law referred to Negroes as heathenish, brutish, and dangerous. The Royal African Company dominated the slave trade in North America for nearly a half-century. Originally created in 1660, in 1672, King Charles II restructured the company and issued a new charter. His charter gave the British the right to occupy land, maintain troops, and exercise martial law in West Africa. Their goal was to obtain silver, gold, and human beings to enslave. By the 1680s, the Royal African Company trafficked nearly 5,000 people from Africa to the New World annually. As more slaves arrived, Virginia decided to double down on the Casual Killing Act in 1672. The law allowed the slave patrol, aka patty rollers, to wound or kill any black person resisting arrest. The law also stated, since slaves were property, anyone that injured or killed a slave while arresting them had to compensate the owner. In a way, it gave them more protection than we have today. The Pilgrims in Massachusetts, the Pilgrims.
See, and that's the thing, right? And it allowed the slave patrol, right, who y'all talking about right now, to wound or kill any person, quote unquote, resisting arrest. Right. But the thing is, though, if you killed them, then you would have to compensate the or somebody, the white slave owner, you know what I'm saying? So you would have to pay them. So they would try to be careful not to do that because then they would have to come out money, right? But the ones who they didn't have to pay, then it's fair game, to them.
The Pilgrims in Massachusetts wanted to keep up with the competition. In 1673, they passed another law, this time attacking black economics. White Christians were forbidden from engaging in commerce or trading with Negroes, free or enslaved. The groundwork for racism was officially established. As the slave codes were introduced into the colonies, the black population increased. In 1625, there were 23 black people documented in Virginia. In 1648, there were 300. By 1675, the black population in Virginia rose to 5,000. Most kidnapped Africans were taken to the Caribbean. In the West Indies, the slave population grew to about 100,000. European immigrants chose to come to the New World as indentured servants, but they weren't quite getting what was promised either. In 1676, Nathaniel Bacon led a revolt that ended with Jamestown burning to the ground.
Oh Lord, the first John Brown here. All right, shouts out to Comet 804. It's almost over, y'all. This is the last. It's only a little bit left. Y'all see here, and I'll stop there. And maybe I'll do this another time. I don't know. We'll see. But shouts out to everybody who supported it or whatever. Um, much love to y'all. But oh Lord, here we go with this Bacon's Rebellion that they like to talk about, the white saviors.
European immigrants chose to come to the New World as indentured servants, but they weren't quite getting what was promised either. In 1676, Nathaniel Bacon led a revolt that ended with Jamestown burning to the ground. Some say Bacon's rebellion was about class, and in a way, it was. For Nathaniel Bacon it wasn't, but he used classism to unite the people. Bacon himself was born to wealthy parents. They paid his way into Cambridge, allowing him to study law. His parents even financed a trip for him to get across the Atlantic.
See, when y'all like to be like, oh, because like I said, race, the concept of racism, not the fact that we're different, you know what I'm saying? And there's different types of what they would call humans and stuff, like the Homo Neanderthal and the Denisovin, and then the Homo sapien, the human being, right? It's not to say that, but just like that, right? And that talking point that that black people like to use, this is about not about race, it's about classism and all of this other stuff. And then especially, like, let's be real, the Moors like to use this one here to be like, oh, if you whatever, and then it was never about race. You look at Bacon's rebel, but you see, even this dude, he was the rich dude, you know what I'm saying? And he was using that to his advantage. You know what I'm saying? That's just what they do.
They paid his way into Cambridge, allowing him to study law. His parents even financed a trip for him to get across the Atlantic. Once Bacon arrived in Virginia, he appointed himself to the governor's council but was rejected. He and Governor William
Just like John Brown. John Brown, when he first started, he was trying to be down. He was like, I want to be down. Right. And then they was like, no. And then like something happened where one of his kids got killed and he got mad. And that's when he was like, oh, let me be this hero. And just like this dude, he was like, oh, I'm gonna be in the government. And they didn't like him. They rejected him. You know what I'm saying? He was like the dude Elon Musk in the Epstein files, right? It was like, nah, we good. Then he got mad and was like, yo, I'm gonna get them to. And why did they unite in the first place? To kill Indians, right? Though, so are you sure you want to say that Bacon's rebellion proves whatever, whatever? Because united with some white boys to go kill some Indians, right? Because I know how much y'all love to not be down with that, you know what I'm saying? But that's what the rebellion was about. He was like, let's unify to go kill more Indians and then go fight them so we can kill more Indians until he got diarrhea and died.
Once Bacon arrived in Virginia, he appointed himself to the governor's council but was rejected. He and Governor William Berkeley were at odds over how they should handle issues with indigenous tribes. Bacon didn't care how the rich treated the poor, or what was happening to Negroes. The revolt began because Bacon wanted to kill more Indians, but the governor didn't want a war. Bacon managed to convince poor white and black men to unite, leading them to slaughter native tribes. When the governor found out, he demanded they stop the attacks. Instead, Bacon led him to the governor's doorstep as they set fire to Jamestown. He was doing well leading a successful rebellion, but then he died of diarrhea. After Bacon's death, the rebellion was over. Bacon's rebellion was one of the first successful rebellions uniting both blacks and whites. The revolt resulted in the ruling class ending the indentured servant, headright, system. Instead, they looked for ways to keep the poor from ever uniting again. Virginia passed multiple laws, one of which forbid all Negroes, free or enslaved, from carrying firearms. Slaves were required to have a pass any time they left the plantation and were restricted from gathering in a group, including at funerals. Anyone who violated the law received 20 lashes on their bare back. Virginia mandated harsher punishments for slaves who tried to escape or assault a white person. Self-defense by any Negro against any white Christian was completely outlawed by 1682. If a black person defended themselves against anyone white, it was punishable by 30 lashes up to death. The Dutch passed a series of slave codes between 1682 to 1685. Starting with black economics, they outlawed engaging in commerce or trade with Negroes. It was illegal for slaves.
It's supposed to be starting with black economics. They outlawed engaging in commerce or trade with Negroes. Right, meaning they started with that. So they started to attack economics first, right? That was the first thing that they did as a part of the slave codes because they need you to be dependent on them so that we got to go to sleep to get up for work. Or y'all guess y'all out right now since it's Friday. Y'all can be out now. You know what I'm saying? Y'all free. Y'all free for the weekend. You know.
It was illegal for slaves to sell or trade goods. Negroes and natives were forbidden from carrying firearms or meeting in groups. The Quakers started to speak out against slavery in Pennsylvania in 1688. The first known organized protest against slavery was a written petition, but only 4 people signed it. Although some good white people have always been against racism, many more have been for it.
You know what? I don't know about that. I don't know if I should have said that. Although some quote unquote good white people they've been against certain systems, right? Like where they might not like to see somebody get shot by the police, but in their mindset, it was like, well, yeah, they're out there because of X, Y, and Z. Not that we ain't guilty of none of the stuff that they're talking about, right? They're saying, well, they excuse why they do it. And they was like, but we'll get more into that as we go on another path. I don't know if y'all want to hear this type of thing again, so um I won't do no more unless y'all say that y'all want to hear it. But I just wanted to play a little bit. This is like the last 3, 4 paragraphs here, so I appreciate y'all for listening. So
Although some good white people have always been against racism, many more have been for it. By 1690, every English colony sanctioned slavery. In South Carolina, the British introduced the Act for the Better Ordering of Slaves from Barbados. The act called for corporal punishment against slaves, including branding, nose slitting, and other emasculating punishments. It also required slaves to get written permission before leaving the plantation. The slave codes were designed to protect the few white elites from the growing slave population. It also prevented poor whites from uniting with Negroes by putting them in a higher social class. Europeans witnessed the treatment of melanated people and realized the advantages of having white skin in the system being created. Even worse, they started enjoying those privileges. Chapter 2.
all right, so they started realizing they had it advantage in their systems by having a lack of melanin. And even worse, they started enjoying those privileges that they got, you know. But anyway, man, shouts out to y'all listening. For everybody who tuned in. Shouts out to Karma 804. Shouts out to Raw. Shouts out to Matron in the building. Shouts out to Koku in the building. Shouts out to Time to Work. I appreciate all of y'all for listening. If y'all want me to do another one at another time, let me know. I'll do it. If not, then it is what it is. I appreciate y'all for listening. But yo, I appreciate it because I am on like 99. And I guess I should have showed that, but I'm on 99. So I guess I had to. Something told me just to come on here, and I didn't even know I was at 99. So it is what it is. I appreciate it. But yo, it's like just me putting this stuff on black sites for black people, they're always gonna be like haters. But and I want to shout out to everybody who did say something. Denise M. Outstanding. I did my research. It starts with the roots, leading very detailed. This person, shouts out Lucky Stars. Great book, inspiring research in depth look into ripple effect of history. Hope I release more soon. Sure, sure. Um, this random person, Amazon customer. Yeah, shouts out to y'all. Um, this person, I have just started reading the book, and from the very beginning, the book holds attention and knowledgeable. I appreciate that. Well, exploration of how racist ideologies develop. All right. And then also you get the haters and stuff like that because all the time you see like the rednecks but look, even this dude here, right? See, he everybody else got the verified purchase and all that stuff. He don't have that. You know what I'm saying? And then say exceeded the he said historical accuracies. I think he got it inaccurate, right? Because I think he meant inaccuracies, but it is historical accuracies. Um are only exceeded by the grammatical errors, right? But also, when you look at this dude, if you was to click on him, best known as the investigator on the History Channel, hunting Hitler, all right? And I wanted to just show it because he's one of those. See, his jank is how to find your edge for men over 50. Like it's that red pill kind of white boy, you know what I'm saying? And they always got some hater stuff to say. Like, I wish I could show you some of the comments that they say, but I like trolling them. It's fun, you know what I'm saying? But they will go on there and hate on the stuff that we do, you know what I'm saying? So I would say if anybody did like read it, and if you like, or an honest review, if you didn't like it, if it was full of grammatical errors, if that's not true, if you liked it, if you learned, if you didn't learn, if it was wrong, if it was right, say something on there, you know what I'm saying? Because I would like the feedback or whatever. But anyway, I'm about to get off of here, y'all. I'll let y'all go enjoy y'all Friday night like y'all already doing. So much love to y'all. I'll probably be back soon. So as always, man, we have got to start standing for something, or we're gonna keep falling for anything.